A former Soviet republic, which maintained the most powerful army in the Central Asian region.
The armed forces of Uzbekistan must remain in a state of heightened combat readiness due to the rapidly changing modern world and the growing threats and challenges to our security.
It was Uzbekistan that was the first to overturn Putin's brainchild, the CSTO, by leaving the organization back in 2012.
This is a very dangerous situation. The authority of the organization has been seriously undermined. NATO members also have plenty of disagreements, but it's hard to imagine, for example, Turkey joining or leaving the bloc at will. I wouldn't rule out that Tashkent and NATO may have had some sort of private arrangements regarding this.
Uzbekistan is one of the key players on the eternally smoldering Afghan battlefield. The Taliban and terrorism have forced the authorities to invest in the military and strengthen the borders. The Afghan-Uzbek border, along with the barrier between North and South Korea, is one of the most heavily guarded zones in the world.
It became abundantly clear that it would indeed be Uzbekistan that would effectively serve as a significant deterrent to any possible further expansion of the Taliban government's sphere of influence and control.
How did Tashkent manage to break free from Moscow's shackles? Is Uzbekistan really the strongest player in Central Asia? And how has living next to perpetually warring terrorists influenced the military and political development of the Uzbeks? All this and more coming up in Arsenal. The history of the armed forces of independent Uzbekistan begins on January 14, 1992, when all former Soviet military units stationed in the country were brought under national jurisdiction. Today, Tashkent has between 60 and 70,000 military personnel. These include military command bodies, ground forces, Air Force, Navy, Special Forces, the National Guard, and the Border Service. Unlike most Central Asian countries, Tashkent does not skip at all on maintaining its army. The analytical portal Global Firepower estimated the funding of the armed forces at $2.8 billion.
For them, that's about 4% of GDP spent on maintaining the army and, accordingly, the military-industrial complex. That's a significant figure even compared to leading European countries. Let me remind you, only at the last NATO summit were defense sector expenditures set at 5%. Before that, it was at the level of 2%.
After the start of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Uzbekistan continued to increase its defense spending. According to experts, Uzbekistan's army now shares the top spot with Kazakhstan, significantly outpacing its Central Asian neighbors, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan. By focusing on its own sovereign armed forces, Tashkent was able to strike the first blow to the cohesion of the CSTO long before Yerevan did.
Over the past 2 years, Armenia, a CSTO member country, has been subjected to aggression from Azerbaijan at least 3 times. What is disheartening is that Armenia's membership in the CSTO did not deter Azerbaijan from its aggressive actions.
Uzbekistan's relationship with the CSTO is a story of its own. In 1992, it was in the capital of Uzbekistan, Tashkent, that the Collective Security Treaty was signed between Russia, Armenia, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan. 7 years later, Tashkent suspended its membership, preferring instead Guam, an organization created by Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova, and Azerbaijan. In 2006, against the backdrop of worsening relations with the West due to widespread internal repression and the persecution of the opposition by the authorities, Uzbekistan restored its membership in the CSTO, but only to leave the organization for good in 2012.
We granted their request and terminated their membership in the CSTO. We had previously agreed that there would be absolutely no more concessions when joining our organization, including for this particular country.
The Uzbek leadership disliked many aspects of the military political organization created in the 1990s by CIS countries for mutual military assistance. Tashkent was categorically opposed to using CSTO forces to resolve internal conflicts and objected to cooperation with the OSCE. There was also a conflict with an ally, Tajikistan. But most importantly, they did not support the pro-Russian bloc's position on issues concerning Afghanistan, which borders Uzbekistan. For many years, Tashkent refused to participate in CSTO military exercises and also objected to the use of collective forces to resolve the situation in Afghanistan, preferring its own diplomacy and bilateral agreements. For Uzbekistan, issues related to Afghanistan and the Taliban are of key importance. Decades of constant war, first the USSR, and then the US with the Taliban. Interestingly, it was through Uzbekistan that Soviet troops once left Afghanistan via the so-called Friendship Bridge, which connects the Afghan city of Haratin and the Uzbek city of Termiz.
Here come the last commands given on Afghan soil. The combat column is moving toward the border. Now, it's all behind them. But the war won't be over for them as long as, at night, they still dream of the faces of their comrades in arms.
32 years later, in 2021, following the withdrawal of the American campaign in Afghanistan and the capture of the capital by the Taliban, opponents of the Taliban from Afghanistan's democratic forces fled across this very same bridge into Uzbekistan. Their equipment and personnel would later become part of the Uzbek army.
According to various estimates, at that time Afghan military personnel managed to transfer up to 30 airplanes and about the same number of helicopters into Uzbekistan. Moreover, they crossed over together with the technical staff responsible for maintaining this equipment. This significantly strengthened the capabilities of the Uzbek army.
Living next door to terrorists and, in general, to a country that is basically a war zone for its own security, Tashkent built the so-called Afghan-Uzbek separation barrier along the entire 137-kilometer border with Afghanistan. At the same time, they have been developing their own military-industrial complex, focusing on modern trends, artificial intelligence, robotic, and unmanned systems.
Uzbekistan's armed forces will introduce new units specializing in countering drones, deploying robots, air defense, and cyber structures utilizing artificial intelligence. When developing the army, it is essential to consider modern armed conflicts and the specific characteristics of military operations.
Understanding the threat posed by Taliban terrorists, the Uzbeks have invested heavily in securing the border. The barrier consists of 2 rows of fences topped with barbed wire, electrified at 380 volts. The entire border is lined with minefields, which are monitored by numerous well-armed patrols.
The government of Uzbekistan is well aware of the external challenges at hand, the existence of drug cartels, drug trafficking through the territory of Afghanistan and, consequently, Uzbekistan, and then on to Europe, and most importantly, the possibility of armed units subordinate to the Taliban government infiltrating the country.
Despite the fact that Tashkent continues close cooperation with Moscow, after all the equipment of Uzbekistan's armed forces, from tanks to fighter jets, is based on Soviet and Russian designs, they cannot be called allies with those from Afghanistan. While Russia is confidently building relations with the terrorist authorities in Kabul, for Uzbekistan, the Taliban are their bitterest enemy.
The issue here is specifically about the possibility of an expansion of extremely radical forms of Islam on the territory of Uzbekistan. And considering that Uzbekistan is a secular state, this is the main challenge for the further coexistence of the neighboring countries. We're talking about Uzbekistan and Afghanistan. In other words, Uzbekistan has a vital interest in not legitimizing the Taliban government. And that's why we can say that, apparently, the vector of military technical cooperation with the Russian Federation will shift towards Western partners.
That's all for now. Don't forget to write in the comments which types of weapons you'd like to learn more about. Like this video and, of course, subscribe to our Arsenal channel. The link is in the description below the video.